This Windows 11 mini PC that I'm taking a look at today is the EliteMini TH80 from Mini's forum. Now, this particular model here has the Core i7, it's 11th gen, the 11800H. Maximum turbo is 4.6 GHz, it does have 8 cores, 16 threads. It's quite a monster of a chip, even though yes, 12th gen, they've even stepped things up further, of course, Intel, but not bad performance you can get out of this. Now the graphics is Intel's UHD for 11th gen. Sadly, it's not packing Iris Xe graphics. Now you can get it as a bare bones or this configuration that they did send out to me to review, which has 16 gigabytes of RAM and a 512 gigabyte SSD. There is room inside to add another NVMe. It's PCIe 4.0 that the slots do support. You can run 3 4K 60 displays with this. It does have Wi-Fi 6E and even a 2.5 gigabit LAN port. In the box, you'll find the power supply. This is a normal kind of size. It is 90 watts, power supply cable, HDMI cable, user guide. That also does show us how to upgrade the RAM, install another hard drive, and then a VESA mounting bracket with screws. Different design now from them, and it's got a bit of a Mac Mini look to it to me with this silver. Now it is plastic, and you'll see up the front here we have a full spec Type-C port. So this is USB 3.2, but it supports display out. So you can actually run 3 displays, 4K 60 max, USB 3.2 Gen 2, 3.5mm with microphone support and a status LED. And then on this side, there's our exit vent. So this is where all the hot air is going to be pushed out by the fan that's inside there. I'll show you the internals shortly. And here on the back, we have then an HDMI 2.0, DisplayPort 1.4. So with those two, you can run another 4K display. 2 4K displays there at 60 Hertz maximum. 2.5 gigabit LAN, and then we have, you can see more USB 3.2s Gen 2s, lots of them, and separate audio jacks at the back here. Kensington lock slot and power in, power with a status LED behind it, and then a reset button if you happen to mess up any of the BIOS settings. So that's a CMOS reset. Then on the back of it, our mounting points there for the VESA mounting bracket. And how do you gain access to the internals? Well, there's this plastic that goes over the top of the underside of it that does need to be removed. There is a little gap just on this side, a little bit hard to see, and this is where you pry it off, which is what I'll do now. Once you remove all of those 4 screws, you just need to pry up this back cover. That's the final step to then gain access to the internals. So you can see our cooler right here. We do have a spare slot. Now that is PCIe 4.0 spec. This one also does support PCIe 4.0, so you can use the faster SSDs in there, M.2, NVMe. And we've got right here our wireless card, which is Wi-Fi 6E. So it's quite cramped. There's not really that much free space in here, but unfortunately we can't put in a 2.5-inch drive, which would be cheaper, maybe larger capacity storage that you want to use. But it is good that we do at least have that. Now, if you remove the cooler, there are 2 RAM slots. They're a little hard to see, but they are just to the right of the cooler where the fan is. So unfortunately, the fan assembly is over the top, so you're going to have to remove it. And then, of course, you're going to have to repaste afterwards because you've moved around the thermal paste. Now, I want to keep the factory paste job intact, so my thermals will be exactly how it is out of the box. So I'm not going to go there, but at least we can upgrade the RAM, add another SSD, and even replace the wireless card if you wanted to do so. Now, the BIOS on this particular TH80 model is quite locked down to us. Now, we've got CPU configuration, but they're just some very advanced settings that you don't normally need to touch. There is no option here for power limits. We cannot undervolt. And probably the only really interesting thing is this here. So power configuration, we do have this AC failure. So you can set this when the power goes off to then just automatically power on when it comes back. So you could run this as a server. You could run it on a switch. You've got that option to do it. And that is really it. There's really nothing else that's interesting in here to be able to tweak. You've got your boot order. But let's move over to Windows 11 now. Now this mini PC does come with 16 gigabytes of RAM. It is in dual channel as I showed you, and it does run at 3.2 gigahertz, the correct speed. I've already tested and checked it out with HW Info. So Windows 11 Pro is the Windows 11 edition you do get with the TH80.
And the disk drive that I showed you before, 512 gigabytes of storage, this is, even though it supports the slot PCIe 4.0, this is only a PCIe 3.0 drive, and it's not a very fast one. Not really that quick at all. It's a Kingston drive, and if you had, say, a Samsung 970 Evo or Evo Plus or whatever, you would get better speeds, but you could even install, say, a Samsung 980, which would be up to 7,000 reads and writes for sequential, if you did want a little bit quicker there. Now, the performance here of the Core i7, the 11800H, is good. It's a very potent, it's a fast chip, 8 cores, 16 threads total, maximum turbo is 4.6 gigahertz. Single core score here, looking good for 11th gen. I know 12th gen now is up around, say, the 16 or 1700 points there. Multi-core score is a little lower than I was expecting here with this particular benchmark. And if you take a look at Cinebench R23, this at least does perform around where I've seen other 11800Hs. But I have actually seen better. I've seen better out of MSI laptops. I think they've got better or higher power limits, and the cooling, I think, is being pushed a little bit more. So that's why they can squeeze a bit more out. But it's not a bad score. It is still very potent for what it is, for the size of it. Good performance out of it. Now, the chipset, just a little more about it here. You'll see that it's running Intel UHD graphics for 11th gen. So it's not Intel's Iris Xe. So this is a bit of a weakness of a mini PC like this, because it doesn't have the more potent graphics. It doesn't do too bad, as you see later on with gaming performance. And finally, I did do a real life here throughput test with the internet. So with the same router, the same connection, which is gigabit fiber, I can get around 920 out of my desktop PC with external antennas, which are high gain ones. They're very big, but with what is built into this particular mini PC with a plastic body, it's doing okay. We're getting around 700 megabits per second maximum that I can pull. Real world test here. It is approximately a standard room size away the router, so I am relatively close to it, but there is part of a wall in the way there, so I think it's faring quite well. Decent performance. And how will it handle streaming 4K? So this is a 4K 60 test. I'll just open it up. I've not run this before, so I want to enable, of course, the stats there, and I need to, of course, make this full screen and 4K, but this should not drop any frames, and you can see it isn't. Not even a single frame. So it is very good at streaming 4K content. Now this is in Chrome. It's probably even better in Edge, but it's looking great. Okay, there, 3 drop frames. That's it. So very good media playback with this TH80 mini PC. Now, how would this PC handle then a demanding task like editing 4K video? So what I have here is not a very huge long timeline. It's around 10 minutes. These are 100 megabit 4K files, only 30 frames per second, and the timeline can sometimes look a little bit laggy. Now, I'm only just using the quarter playback resolution here, so if you really have a lot of different layers, effects, transitions, and you're grading, you're going to run into problems. It will end up becoming a little bit slow, I feel here. You do need a dedicated GPU for anything more than just basic 4K edits. Then the export times, will they be a lot slower since it doesn't have the Iris Xe graphics but just Intel UHD for 11th gen? So what I'm exporting here is the 4K YouTube preset, like I always do in my videos. It's just 1 minute of footage just to gauge how long it would take. So start on the timer and then export. I still expect this to be pretty quick, and it looks like it is tearing through that. With Intel QuickSync, normally does help, so it doesn't seem to be slowing this down at all. I'll skip ahead now to the final result. Okay, it is about to finish up, and that is approximately, you could say, around 46 seconds. So I've seen faster. Could be a little quicker, and that's probably because it's only got the 32 executional units with the UHD graphics. Now, as for gaming performance, well, it's looking alright. You can game. This is GTA 5 on the normal settings, 1080p. I wouldn't put it onto higher settings, because you can see just in the car here that we are looking at only, well, scraping 39 frames per second. It's just going a little bit over 40. I mean, it's okay, this kind of performance. So it is playable. It's just not as good as Iris Xe graphics. With this kind of spec, if it did have Iris Xe graphics, then we would probably be looking at, I would say, around 60-70 frames per second. So we are definitely missing out on a little bit of that performance because it's just the UHD graphics, unfortunately. No Iris Xe, as I've mentioned a couple of times now. Now, a game like The Witcher 3, unfortunately at 1080p, it's just not playable. You can see we're getting a frame rate of 20 frames per second. This is too choppy to be enjoyable, so you're going to have to lower the resolution down to 720p and the lowest possible settings. Then it might be alright for The Witcher 3. Then the thermals, it got up to 97 degrees Celsius. It did trigger thermal throttling. And the fan noise, normally it's okay, but if you push it really hard, I have noticed a couple of times, it does peak and become quite annoying, the fan. It's getting a little loud, and you'll hear it at its loudest right now in this sample. Finally, Linux support. This is Linux Manjaro that I'm using right now, a live USB pen drive image, and all the drivers do work, but I am, by the way, using the open source drivers. It's an option you do have with Linux Manjaro. So the Wi-Fi card, the Bluetooth, the controls for audio, all of that does seem to be working, which is good.
Final verdict then on the EliteMini TH80 is that it is a very quick and snappy little mini PC here that runs Windows 11 Pro. So if you need the CPU performance, it's got it in this smaller form factor if you're a Windows user. However, it's lacking a little in the integrated GPU department. So dedicated graphics, not here of course, not on board. And Intel's UHD graphics for 11th gen is missing a lot of those executional units because they needed room for the 8 cores on this APU, on the chipset here. So instead of having Iris-60 graphics with 96 executional units, it's just the 32. So, and that is definitely an area where it is lacking is the GPU performance. So if you're someone that games a lot, you're missing out on a bit of performance there. I would look at a model that has either Vega graphics, like Vega 8, Vega 10, and Iris-Xe if you really want to be able to game at 1080p with a good frame rate with older titles. Now, if you tried to play on this model here, Cyberpunk 2077, forget about it. It's a bit of a slideshow. It's going to be around like 15 frames per second, 20 if you lower it to 720p. It just is not performing well at all. So 10 frames per second, who wants to game like that? You can't. It's pretty much impossible. The other is the fan noise. It can cycle up sometimes a little loud, as I showed you from the sample. You heard that, well, it's a bit noisy there. It's definitely not the quietest mini PC. And then the upgrades is one other area. I liked the older design from Mini's forum, where you could simply just remove the 4 screws, take the bottom of it off, and then you had access to everything, your SSD, your RAM. Now I know they do have that additional M.2 slot, which is great, and it's PCIe 4.0 spec, even better, so it's the faster one there. But in order to upgrade the RAM, you have to remove the whole cooler where the fan is. The RAM is directly below that fan, which is a little annoying there, and just to get into it isn't quite as easy. So that's another little minor con there. Overall, it is a very fast little mini PC. I like the 3 displays that you can run out of it. 4K 60, we've got the 2.5 gigabit LAN. Oh, and another minor as well too is the BIOS is pretty much locked down on this. They don't want us touching power limits at all. I can kind of see why, because it got up to 97 degrees Celsius and triggering that fan noise and a little bit of thermal throttling there. So there we go. That is the full story of the Minis Forum EliteMini TH80.